The last video on this three-part series will focus on the theme Yogananda and Steve. For this final video, I would like to consider the role and influence that Yogananda had on Steve Jobs, the co-founder and former CEO of Apple. According to Walter Isaacson's biography of Steve Jobs' life and legacy, Isaacson noted Jobs' 7-month pilgrimage retreat to India, where he met a variety of spiritual masters and yogis. However, at this time period, Steve Jobs did not have access to any internet connectivity for long periods of time, prompting him to read the only book that he had at his disposal, the Autobiography of a Yogi by the man himself, Paramahansa Yogananda. This was a book that he first read during his teenage years, remaining the only ebook that he downloaded on the iPad, which underscores the vast influence that this book had on him and specifically his worldview. While Isaacson does not necessarily dedicate a section in his book that draws any explicit influences that this book had on the life of Steve Jobs, I would like to dedicate this specific video to jot down a few examples that suggest the influences that Paramahansa Yogananda had on Steve Jobs. Firstly, I'd like to focus on the topic of the aesthetic appeal of Apple products. So, it could be contended that the aesthetic simplicity of Apple products had been inspired by Steve Jobs' interest in the emphasis on spiritual simplicity. According to Isaacson, Jobs' love of simplicity in design was honed when he became a practitioner of Buddhism. After dropping out of college, he made a long pilgrimage through India seeking enlightenment, but it was mainly the Japanese path of Zen Buddhism that stirred his sensibilities. Zen was a deep influence, said Daniel Kotke, a college friend who accompanied Steve Jobs on the trip. You see it in his whole approach of stark minimalist aesthetics, intense focus. While the primary influence on design simplicity can be attributed to Zen Buddhism, there still remains a connection between the notion of simplicity and the propagation of spirituality by Yogananda. In his teachings, Paramahansa Yogananda had constantly emphasized how the process of spirituality is intended to minimize material bondage, consequently result in having a sense of simplicity in the material realm. However, it is important to note that Steve Jobs explored this notion of simplicity within the realm of product design, which was the primary USP that distinguished Apple from its competitors. Therefore, Jobs' interest in exploring the idea of simplicity within the process of creating Apple's revolutionary products reinforces the influence of Indic spirituality in the legacy of his own company. Secondly, I'd also like to focus on the notion of setting up unbelievable expectations. It is clearly known that Steve Jobs was a notorious leader who expected what was deemed to be impossible. To this end, he remained excruciatingly stubborn, leading to a culture of constantly berating employees in public when they did not meet his unrealistic expectations. And it is safe to say that these traits are the very antithesis of someone who is involved in the realm of spirituality. Nevertheless, it is interesting to note that the very notion of expecting to achieve an objective that is humanly impossible has arisen from Jobs' inspiration from Yogananda's miracles. Many of Apple's employees have confessed that Steve Jobs constantly remained in his own illusion of reality, where it was simply possible to achieve the impossible. The very notion of transcending these conventional limits is said to have taken inspiration from Yogananda's teachings. According to Les Kaye, who was a member of the Los Altos Zen meditation group that Steve Jobs attended, there was no roadblocks in his mind, nothing that said, "Oh no, you can't do that." This mentality, while being genetically inborn, was an ideal that was venerated by Paramahansa Yogananda's accounts of miracles that he had supposedly facilitated. By performing these miracles, he was able to showcase how we have been disillusioned by the supposed limitations that have been set upon the mortal man. Let us take the following example written by Pereira in the chapter Miracles and Healings by Yogananda. One day in 1935, Yogananda, his boyhood friend Tulsi Bose, and two others were meditating in a room when one of Tulsi's cousins rushed in crying urgently, "Come quickly, it's my wife. She's dying." The two doctors in attendance had told the husband that there was no hope for his wife's recovery. Tulsi's cousins knew Yogananda and he had deep faith in him. Therefore, hoping against hope, he had come for help. Yogananda, with Tulsi, his cousin, and the two others who were meditating, reached to see the dying wife. On arriving at the cousin's home, Yogananda went immediately into the bedroom while asking others to wait outside while closing the door. Meanwhile, another highly respected physician who came to see what he could do was obliged to wait. Yogananda didn't come out for more than 45 minutes. For Tulsi's cousin, it seemed like an eternity. While when Yogananda came out of the room, the cousin's wife was with him, walking without assistance. The three doctors waiting outside were astounded. This, they exclaimed, was truly a miracle. Yogananda told the husband. After that, the cousin's wife came frequently to see Yogananda while he was in India. Eventually, she became Yogananda's disciple and took Kriya Yoga initiation from him. This is one of the many examples where Yogananda and those around him have documented the miraculous endeavors that he was involved in, which best exemplifies how he was able to transcend physical boundaries to achieve miraculous feats. This seemed to have resonated with Steve Jobs' fervent belief in achieving goals that were practically impossible. Nonetheless, this very trait has been invaluable in instilling a belief amongst his employees, especially in their potential to achieve miraculous feats on the technological front. Well, of course, he did have certain issues which seem to suggest that he himself was not a yogi in any sense. There were some traits which have resonated with him in such a way that it can be even seen in the very products that he envisioned. And the legacy that Apple holds is reliant on this very notion of simplicity in the products that they design, which again seems to coincide with the messages of Yogananda. And so this is a clear example of how Yogananda's teachings seem to have influenced many devotees around the world, including even the likes of Steve Jobs.